بررسی جنگ افغانستان در مجلس سنای ایالات متحده با حضور شماری از ژنرالان پیشین آمریکایی، دیپلمات‌ها، مشاوران سیاسی و مقام‌های سابق حکومت افغانستان برگزار شد. این نشست روز گذشته با هدف بررسی ابعاد مختلف جنگ افغانستان و پاسخ به پرسش‌های پیرامون روند آشتی با گروه طالبان برگزار شده است. کالین جکسون رئیس این کمیسیون تاکید کرده است که برای پاسخ به پرسش‌های کلیدی درباره مصالحه با گروه طالبان باید نظرات شرکای افغانستان شنیده شود.
We talked a lot about reconciliation opportunities with the Taliban early in the conflict. I certainly embarked on this project thinking that this was a relatively narrow question about what was possible at Bonn or around Bonn. And the more we talk about it, I'm seized with the notion that this is a basket of opportunities and we need to be very precise about what we're asking. What types of reconciliation were possible? What would the terms of that reconciliation have looked like? What impact would that have had on the stability or instability of Afghanistan? And today was proof positive that answering those important questions can only be done by interacting with Afghans. They have given us the important precision about what was possible, what was not possible when these opportunities manifested themselves. So I think this is, another plea for us to include our Afghan partners in ways that sometimes we did during the war, but sometimes we ignored.
شمیلا چودری رئیس مشترک این کمیسیون هشدار داده است که اگر ما نتوانیم آنچه را در افغانستان رخ داده توضیح دهیم، این خطر وجود دارد که مفهوم جنگ به یک ایده انتزاعی و غیر عینی تبدیل می شود.
And best practices that we have to devote our time to, and we will be looking at those in the near future as well. So there's lots more to talk about. Please don't leave disappointed that we didn't cover everything. That was not our goal, but we did have a very rich discussion, both with our former colleagues and our Afghan partners and friends, and for that we're deeply grateful. Colin, over to you for some closing remarks.
هنری کرابتون، افسر بازنشسته عملیات سازمان مرکزی آمریکا یا CIA، مأموریت 3 ماه نخست آمریکا در افغانستان پس از حملات 11 سپتامبر را موفقیت آمیز توصیف کرده و گفته است که در آن مقطع سیا و فرماندهی عملیات ویژه توانستند دشمن ایالات متحده را در افغانستان شکست دهند.
Certainly 9/11 was the watershed. Before 9/11, Pakistan was very close to the Taliban. Immediately after 9/11, Richard Armitage met with the Pakistan ambassador here, the head of Pakistani intelligence, and really gave them an ultimatum. They quickly began to cooperate. They, on our behalf, reached out to the Taliban with an offer that the Taliban, if they would step aside, we would be glad to take care of al-Qaeda. The Taliban leader, Mullah Omar, with the encouragement of the Pakistanis, held a 2-day conference among Taliban leaders, and they decided to reject that overture. Even with that, the CIA, a senior CIA officer, in concert with the Pakistanis, met with Taliban envoys as far as, I think, into early October even, and again made the same overture, working with the Pakistanis. If the Taliban could give us bin Laden, or if they could do justice as they saw fit, or just get out of our way. We did everything I think we could to focus on al-Qaeda, but the Taliban made their choice, and they had to pay the price for that. The Pakistanis later on, they were certainly incredibly helpful in the capture of key al-Qaeda leaders. Later on, I grew less confident of the Pakistan's ability to do their job, ability or willingness to do their job. And this was underscored, of course, by bin Laden finding safe haven in Pakistan for all those years.
Could you just clarify, Ambassador Crumpton, when you said later on, were you referring to any series of years there?
Yeah, later on in 05-07, when I was working for Secretary of State Rice as a coordinator for counterterrorism, and I went to Pakistan, I went to Afghanistan, and I came back discouraged. given the level of Taliban and Al-Qaeda activity in the tribal areas.
Thank you.
اندرو ناتایسیوس مدیر پیشین آژانس توسعه بین‌المللی ایالات متحده آمریکا یا USAID نیز با اشاره به فعالیت‌های گسترده این نهاد در افغانستان گفته است که اهداف امریکا در افغانستان هیچگاه همراستا نبودند، چرا که این اهداف با یکدیگر در تضاد قرار داشتند.
Stanley McChrystal is a very smart guy. We had great respect for him. When he wrote that plan, all the career people were appalled because he thought we could do the build part of it in a couple of years. You don't build a school just by going in and building it. You have to get the community to agree to it. You have to get the ministry to agree to it, and then you have to find out who owns the land you want to build on, because there is no deed system in Afghanistan. And so it would take a long time of process before we build anything. We also have the Congress passed a law saying all AID projects have to conform to the American Disabilities Act. There's a law requiring us to do an environmental impact statement. We have to comply with the federal acquisition regulations and bid everything out, which takes a year and a half. We didn't write those laws, the Congress did. And with the administration's support in the White House, because the president signed these laws. We didn't make up these processes. Why do we hire consultants? Because you require us to. I wrote an article that's widely read, or was read in AID, called The Clash of the Counter-Bureaucracy and Development. It was published by the Center for Global Development, if you want to go into this in more depth. So our time horizon, and McChrystal realized it when we explained it to him. Some of the career people said Petraeus also understood the mistake they had made, and other career people said he did not understand. McChrystal clearly understood there was a mistake. Finally, this coordination business. There's a huge amount of studies done on coordination in the federal government, and they all conclude the same thing. It does not work for the reasons that Seidman says in the quote in my written testimony. I didn't make that up. It doesn't work because there are clashing objectives and clashing missions and clashing statutes that we have complied with. The Defense Department doesn't have to, when they build a school, they don't have to comply with the American Disabilities Act, and they exempted themselves from the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, and environmental impact statements. We had to comply with those. Of course it took longer to do all those.
دیوید بارنو فرمانده پیشین نیروهای آمریکایی در افغانستان نیز در این نشست گفت نبود اتحاد در اقدامات، فقدان تداوم رهبری و وجود دشمن با پناهگاه‌های امن بیرونی از جمله دلایل اصلی تضعیف مأموریت آمریکا در افغانستان بود.
Recognized, as I noted, we were the economy of force theater, which means our goal was to maximize the impact of the capabilities that we had. My force levels during the 19 months I was there, I was able to increase them from 14,000 to 21,000. So I did have a significant bump up, primarily focused on the Afghan presidential election in 2004. But even that was a fragment of the total numbers in Iraq. That said, I actually thought the light footprint from a military standpoint during my time there was the right solution, given the nature of the Afghan people. And as we heard in some of the earlier testimony today, the perpetual affronts that were possible between military interaction with Afghan civilians. Having fewer troops made that less likely, and we actually put some measures in place to mitigate that even further. So resources never enough, but I wasn't concerned. My goal wasn't to replicate the numbers in Iraq, and I thought I had broadly about enough, just enough to do my job when I was there.
I've got about a minute left, but on the escape valve, I think I remember this very well. Did we have a good enough strategy? It seems like it was a little bit diplomacy. It was a little bit always going to the top general that was the head of ISI and trying to convince him to crack down in the FATA. Is there anything that we should have done to crack down better on that external safe haven?
I think ultimately that had to be a conversation with Pakistan. And I think during my time, I felt we made some progress with that. We actually got the Pakistani army to go into the tribal areas and have a pretty big fight in the spring of 2004. They took a lot of casualties, which was something they had never done before, had never been in those areas before in their history. That did not sustain itself in the years to come, and I think that was a shortfall, and it allowed that sanctuary to become even deeper and more developed than it was during the time I was.
کمیسیون بررسی جنگ افغانستان در دومین نشست استماع عمومی خود با موضوعات از جمله سیاست ایالات متحده آمریکا در قبال افغانستان و ایران نقش پاکستان، ظرفیت طالبان در همکاری امنیتی با جامعه جهانی و درس‌های کلیدی برای تصمیم گیری‌های آینده پرداخته است. در همین حال معاون پیشین ریاست جمهوری افغانستان اظهار داشت که عدم حضور طالبان در نشست بن، نبود نهادهای نظارتی برای اجرای توافقات و فقدان مکانیزم‌های پیشگیرانه برای مداخلات کشورهای همسایه از جمله کاسیای این نشست بود. آقای قانونی به صورت آنلاین در این نشست شرکت داشت. با اشاره به بحران‌های جاری در افغانستان تاکید کرد که بازخوانی تجربه کنفرانس بن می‌تواند آموزنده و راهگشا باشد. در همین حال دکتر خالدین زیایی رئیس اندیشکده گفتمان تعلیمی ملت میگوید با کمال احترام لازم میدانم در مورد برخی اظهارات معاون پیشین ریاست جمهوری افغانستان آقای قانونی نکات را مطرح کنم. من به این باورم که برای درک بهتر و یافتن راه حل‌های مؤثر برای بحران‌های افغانستان باید به تحلیل عمیق‌تر و جامع‌تری از وضعیت موجود پرداخت. اندیشکده گفتمان تعلیمی ملت یک نهاد غیر دولتی است که راهکارهای سازنده و خلاق را برای بازسازی ذهن و تفکر نسل آینده ساز افغانستان تدوین و تطبیق می نماید. این اندیشکده در اوایل سال 2024 در کنفرانس امنیتی هرات در شهر دوشنبه پایتخت تاجیکستان اعلام موجودیت کرده است. دکتر زیایی همچنان رئیس یک مرکز گفتگوی ادیان و فرهنگ‌ها در سازمان فرهنگ و ارتباطات اسلامی است. وی معتقد است که کشورهای همسایه افغانستان باید توانمندی‌های علمی خود را به اشتراک بگذارند تا از تحول و پیشرفت علمی دنیا عقب نمانند. وی همچنین بر لزوم توجه به تحولات تکنولوژیک به ویژه در حوزه هوش مصنوعی و تاثیر آن بر جوامع دینی و فرهنگی تاکید دارد. با توجه به این نکات پیشنهاد می شود که در تحلیل و بررسی وضعیت افغانستان دیدگاه و تجربیات نهادهای مستقل و متخصص نیز مورد توجه قرار گیرد تا راه حل‌های جامع و مؤثر برای بهبود شرایط این کشور ارائه گردد.
When I was chief of staff to the president by a clandestine Taliban delegation who presented me a list of 30 Taliban leaders, 12 of whom were ex-ministers and 11 of whom were ex-governors, including notable figures such as Jalaluddin Haqqani and Mawlay Kabir. They expressed a willingness to reconcile contingent upon receiving amnesty for their past actions. However, when I presented this opportunity to President Karzai, he showed little interest and referred me to Khalilzad, who in turn took too long to respond. Meanwhile, President Karzai reassigned me as ambassador to Iran and transferred the responsibility for reconciliation efforts to Sabghatullah Mujadidi. Unfortunately, Mujadidi's mandate, and again that mandate was decided by Afghans and foreigners, focused more on surrender rather than true reconciliation. When I relayed these developments to the Taliban delegation, they were understandably frustrated and left in anger. By 2006, when Taliban had regained a foothold in Afghan villages in the Pashtun-dominated south and Quetta, Peshawar, Miram Shah Shuras were emerging, President Karzai began advocating for reconciliation. However, the U.S. remained opposed. It wasn't until 2009 under President Obama's strategy that both President Karzai and the U.S. aligned on the need for reconciliation. But then it was too late.